I'm Jennifer Della Quadri, and this is the Raising Happy Teens podcast, where you learn how to successfully guide your teenager into adulthood without losing your sanity in the process. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. I've been having a lot of conversations with my clients lately that revolve around how they are feeling inadequate as parents, as role models, as human beings, and how that impacts their life and how it impacts their ability to connect with their teenager, connect with their partners, enjoy their life in general. This is something that comes up with everyone in some capacity. And there is an approach that I always take with my clients that I thought would be good to share with you here today. So if you've worked with me, the things that I'm talking about will sound familiar to you. If you have not, these are things that you can really do to help address that inner voice that you have, that we all have, that tells us that we're not good enough. So I'm going to share with you a little background on it, and then I'm going to give you 3 examples of ways that we show up in our life that signify that we are operating from a message or an internal belief that we are inadequate in some way. And then I will give you 3 steps that you can take to turn it around so that that inner voice that's telling you you're not good enough or that feeling about inadequacy is not dictating how you behave and how you move into this world. And what's great about that is when you start to turn it around, it automatically impacts how you feel about yourself, but then it starts to impact your relationships. It starts to impact your work. It starts to impact your health, your finances, your whole life. So it's like digging into the core of who you are, shifting the narrative to something that feels good to you, and then operating from that new internal system. It is life-changing, to say the least. And what I'm sharing with you is, on the surface, very basic sounding, but I must say that it is not necessarily easy to do in practice. It's going to really shift the way you view how you move in the world. So if you've ever felt like you don't measure up in any capacity, this episode is for you. And this can apply to your teenager as well. Your teenager has their own internal monologue and their own inner voice that tells them they're not good enough. This is a general podcast episode that can apply to anyone who has ever felt inadequate. This is for you. If you're listening, you're in the right place. So like I said, we all have that inner voice that says that we're not good enough. So I want you to think about someone in your mind who you feel like really has it all together, in whatever way you feel like it reflects that they have it together. So it may be somebody who is super organized, or somebody who's always put together on the outside, or somebody who's always calm, or somebody who's achieved really great things in their career. I want you to think about that person and bring them to mind. And then I want you to recognize that that person, let's just imagine Taylor Swift, for example. I'm not a Swiftie, and you may hate me because I said that, but I'm not. And it's not because I don't like her, but it's just because she's fine. Like, I'm good with her, but I'm not a Swiftie, but I bring her up because everybody knows who Taylor Swift is. She is the #1 music artist, right? She's #1. She's got these amazing costumes. She's got this tour. There's millions of people who come to see her shows. She's amazing. Taylor Swift has an inner voice that tells her that she's not good enough. Everybody has it. And this inner voice, it comes in all forms. And it was created when we were young. And in coaching, we call this inner voice a gremlin. I've brought the gremlin up on the podcast before, so you may be familiar with it. You may have heard it before. But the gremlin's job is not to beat us down. Its job is to protect us. It's basically to keep us small so that we don't put ourselves out there and risk judgment or having an uncomfortable feeling. So going back to my example of Taylor Swift, if her gremlin was running the show, do you think that she would be getting up on stage and doing these performances? No, she absolutely would not. She would be playing small. She would not be where she is if she did not know how to speak back to that voice. So, like I said, the job is to protect us. So, let me give you an example. Let's say when you were young, you were in school and you raised your hand to give an answer to, say, a math problem, and you were wrong. It was an incorrect answer. And then Tommy next to you laughed at you. And in that moment, you felt embarrassed, or maybe you felt ashamed. A gremlin was created. And that gremlin's message is you're not good enough. Maybe it's tweaked in that situation to you're not smart enough, right? It comes in different forms, but the general underlying message is you're not good enough. So the next time you have the answer, your gremlin pipes up and says, you're not good enough. So you don't raise your hand. Boom. You're protected from feeling embarrassed. But because you don't raise your hand, you're not putting yourself out there. You're not being heard. You're not taking risks. You're not being the person who knows the answers and proving your inner gremlin wrong. So now we're going back to Taylor Swift. I had no plan in talking about Taylor Swift in this episode, but here we are. If Taylor Swift had picked up a guitar at a young age, went and performed a concert and messed up, or did a little recital and messed up, and then somebody laughed at her or somebody, made fun of her or whatever, and she decided, you know what, I'm not a good enough guitar player. I'm not going to do any more performances. Imagine the impact, right? That's one experience, one gremlin that could have been created and could have totally run the show for her to hold back. But she fought back. I'm going to get to that. So that's one way the gremlin can show up, keeping you from raising your hand and saying the answer. Or maybe you only raise your hand when you're 100% certain that you have the right answer. You still miss out on learning opportunities and you're still holding yourself back. Or let's say you blame Tommy for laughing at you and making you feel bad about yourself. It's Tommy's fault I never raised my hand. Or, he's such a jerk. My life would be so much better if Tommy didn't sit next to me in second grade. You're still not being heard. You're still not getting out there. And you're still not taking risks and growing and learning. So now I'm going to dive into the 3 ways that you show up in an unhealthy way, or that we show up in unhealthy ways to protect ourselves from feeling uncomfortable. And it's all coming from that inner voice that we're not good enough, that feeling of inadequacy. And there are 3 ways that we show up. The first is perfectionism, this constant striving to be better. Nothing is ever good enough. The goals are just always out of reach, or when they're reached, the bar just keeps moving up and just out of reach. And there's also a lot of comparison with perfectionism, comparison with others, feeling as though you don't measure up. And perfectionism in and of itself is very action-oriented. I need to work harder. I need to do more. I need to be better. I need to check off all these things off my list. I need to achieve all these goals. And they're always just out of reach. It's always doing. And you're unable to just relax, celebrate, and enjoy what is. Because it's just out of reach. It's just not quite there. So the feeling of inadequacy, an unhealthy or unproductive approach, is to just be as perfect as you possibly can. If I'm perfect, I won't feel inadequate. The second strategy is avoidance. So specifically avoiding anything that's going to make you feel inadequate. Playing small, not taking risks, avoiding failure. You're basically avoiding doing anything that you might not be instantly good at. And it can also be avoiding doing anything that makes you feel uncomfortable feelings, like staying busy. Always constantly doing things that keep you from being where you are right now and feeling how you feel right now. Again, checking off lists, constantly finding new hobbies, binging Netflix, scrolling your phone, avoiding being with what is. So that's number 2. And number 3 is blaming, pointing fingers and blaming someone else for your feelings of inadequacy. It's my boss's fault I didn't get a raise. It's my teacher's fault I didn't get a good grade. It's my mom's fault that I hate playing the piano. Placing blame on someone else gives us some relief from the feelings of inadequacy because we don't have to take ownership for our own lives. Our frustrations are out of our hands, and so therefore they're not our fault. And it also keeps us from having to do anything about it. So those are the 3 things that people tend to do to avoid feeling inadequate: perfectionism, avoidance, and blaming. So think about those 3 things, and I want you to just identify, of those 3 things, which do I do? Which do I lean toward? Some of you may have some overlapping things. Some of you may hear one and go, oh yeah, that's 100% me. And you may hear one and go, that's not really me. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just starting by noticing, which category do I fit in? Oh, I'm on to myself there. Yep, I see what I'm doing. Okay. Now what to do about it? There's 3 steps. Very simple, very straightforward. The first is awareness. Just become aware of your pattern. And when I ask you that question, you had awareness. So you've already done step 1. Congratulations. Be aware of your gremlin and its message. Just notice when it shows up, notice what it's saying, and just recognize how it impacts how you think, how you feel, and how you behave in your life. And step 2 is to have compassion for that inner self, that self that feels less than or unworthy, the self that feels inadequate, that self that was embarrassed or ashamed. To have compassion for that part of you and to care for it. And these 2 things, awareness and compassion, they have to be done together. Because if you just have awareness without compassion, that can turn into rumination. Like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. Oh, I'm a perfectionist. See, look at me trying to be perfect, constantly ruminating and then just further solidifying the pattern. And then if you only have compassion without awareness, that can turn into self-pity. Oh, poor me, nothing ever works out. My life sucks, all of those things. So have awareness, have compassion. And then number 3 is where you start to redirect and form a new identity. So instead of I'm not good enough, you direct your thought to something like I'm growing into the person I want to become. Or I love and accept myself just as I am. And if those identities or thoughts don't feel accessible, that's okay. Your gremlin's just really loud, and that's okay. You can create something called a bridge thought, like I'm willing to believe that I am good enough just as I am. Or I'm open to the idea that I am complete and whole just as I am. Something that's a little more accessible. And so what ends up happening is when you intentionally redirect, so you recognize, hey, I hear this gremlin's message. I have compassion for myself and awareness and compassion for this message. And I'm going to choose to think this. And then when you redirect, your brain wants to prove you right. And so looks for evidence out in the world to prove you right. So I'm good enough and whole just as I am. And it will recognize when you're in those moments where you feel good enough, or when you feel whole or peaceful or just where you are in the moment, you'd be like, see, I was right. See, I was right. Versus when the gremlin's running the show and the gremlin's really loud, you're looking for evidence to prove the gremlin right. And this gremlin is not you. This gremlin is just a part that was created to protect you, a voice, an identity that was created to protect you. And so you're there, you're accepting it, you're willing to notice it, but you're not willing to allow it to be in charge anymore. And there's lots more that we could do with gremlin work. I do deeper gremlin work with my clients, but this really is the first step in really challenging any notion that you don't measure up. So move through the week. Try this on, see how it fits. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you left me a review, rated the podcast, just to get this information into the hands of more parents of teenagers. We're all in this together. And of course, reach out to me if you would like to hear more about my one-on-one coaching package. I would love to meet you, connect with you, and potentially work together. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. If you liked this episode, I'd like to invite you to join Raising Happy Teens, my free online community for parents of teenagers, where every week I host Ask a Coach. You bring your parenting questions, and I provide expert advice and coaching. Click the link in the show notes to join today. I'll see you inside.